Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco-socialist program that my running mate, Angela Walker, and I ran on in 2020. And we're going to put in the chat, I just gave a talk on a panel on roadmaps to eco-socialism for the Green Eco-Socialist Network. It's up on YouTube now, and check it out. It's goes over 2 hours, although they've got it broken down into chapters, so you can, take parts of it, look for what I had to say or what somebody else had to say. But take a look at that. I think it was a good discussion, and it I think covers a lot of important issues around the question of eco-socialism. So here we are. Netanyahu seems to be trying to start a war, a regional war. The electronic device terrorism this week, bombing in civilian neighborhoods in Beirut, saying they're going after military targets. They apparently did get a Hezbollah commander, but bombing civilian areas is a war crime, like the electronic device explosions were. I mean, those are going off in supermarkets and people's cars on the street. And a lot of the people were just ordinary people. Children got killed. And the Israeli defense minister said they're shifting forces now from Gaza up to Lebanon. It looks like they're going to go in. And how Hezbollah and particularly Iran respond and its proxies. And I think it's pretty clear, Netanyahu wants to keep this war going because if the war ends, there'll be elections and he'll lose, and then he'll have to go to trial for the bribery and other corruption charges he faces. So he's a lot like Trump. He wants the power to stay out of jail. So meanwhile, the genocide in Gaza continues. And the Biden administration this week admitted that they're not now, given what Israel has done and the response from Hamas and the other opponents of Israel, there's not going to be a ceasefire and hostage deal for the rest of the Biden administration. And that's, terrible news. Not only will the genocide in Gaza continue, but the violent occupation and expansion of occupations in the West Bank will continue. And so he's going to keep the war going to stay out of jail. And you would think that these recent provocations from Israel would give Kamala Harris the reason to change policy and condition arms to Israel on its adhering to international law and getting serious about negotiating with the Palestinians about a political solution. Now, if it is a full-scale regional war, the U.S. has military assets there, and they're going to end up being an active participant. And it will be a war of the U.S. with Israel against the whole Middle East. So if for no other reason, a vote for Jill Stein is a vote against this madness. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, will be at the UN this week, where he's going to present his victory plan. And I guess this is an updated version of his 10-point peace plan. Meanwhile, Russia continues to drop glide bombs on civilian as well as military targets. These bombs are as big as 3.3 tons of TNT, which sends shrapnel around in a half-mile radius, particularly in civilian areas. These are war crimes in themselves. And that's why the Ukrainian cities that Russia has captured, like Mariupol, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, look like Gaza City. They're flattened with power, waste, sewage, school, and hospital infrastructure destroyed. Now, Ukraine has been asking the U.S. to be able to use the ATACMS missiles the U.S. has provided some of them with to strike, and also to get the long-range cruise missiles that the UK and France have provided to strike air bases inside Russia, from which these fighter bombers take off to launch these massive glide bombs on Ukraine. But last weekend, Biden administration reaffirmed that the U.S. is not going to allow these missile strikes on Russian air bases. And the Russian leaders are rattling their nuclear sabers again, saying such strikes would be a NATO escalation of the war, and implied that they would respond with tactical nukes or at least heavy conventional airstrikes against NATO countries. Now, Putin and his colleagues have been threatening nukes since the very beginning of the war. They said if anybody provides arms to Ukraine, they'll be considered a target. But the fact is, these are bluffs. Putin is not stupid. He knows a direct strike on NATO would lead to a massive conventional response. That's what the reporting is, that the U.S. has planned. They won't respond with nukes, even if Russia uses tactical nukes to strike NATO or even Ukraine. But that would destroy the Russian military in Ukraine and its military production and supply lines inside Russia. And Putin doesn't want that. But Biden is letting Putin bluff him into limiting Ukraine's ability to defend itself. I mean, air defenses are pretty good against the drones and long-range missiles that Russia launches at Ukraine, but they can't stop the glide bombs, which are only in the air for a very short time. And it's like trying to shoot a speeding bullet with a revolver. It's just, you can't do it. And to call Ukraine strikes on air bases from which bombing is launched on Ukraine is like saying if the Palestinians could strike Israeli air bases to stop them from flattening Gaza, that would be escalation on the part of the Palestinians. I mean, you got to remember who the aggressor is and who the victim is. So fighting back is not escalation. So as I said, Zelensky is going to be at the UN this week. He's going to present his victory plan to Biden and Harris and Trump and other leaders of other countries. And Zelensky has already said that getting permission to use U.S. and other NATO weapons against Russian air bases and their fighter bombers that are devastating Ukraine is part of the victory plan. But it already looks like I mentioned that Biden said no to that part. Now, there's a lot of speculation by journalists and military analysts that Zelensky's victory plan is offering an alternative, a compromise to military victory over the Russian occupation. And of course, a victory would be a ceasefire, and a victory would be the Ukrainians pushing the Russians out of Ukraine. But the compromise would be a ceasefire and freeze on the front lines. And this is a speculation in return for Ukraine being allowed immediate accession to NATO. And Ukraine would want that because it would be a security guarantee for the 80% of Ukraine that Russia hasn't occupied. But Ukraine would not recognize the occupied territories as part of Russia, but would seek to regain them diplomatically, not militarily. And hope for a change of regimes in Russia that would make that possible. I mean, they're really hoping for something like Germany, where reunification came after almost 50 years when the Soviet Union collapsed. And whether or not that's in Zelensky's plan, leading U.S. and European military, intelligence, diplomatic, and academic people have been calling for this kind of compromise. Although some of them have called for Ukrainian neutrality instead of NATO membership, which would be, a non-starter for the Ukrainians. I mean, the Ukrainians weren't much about getting into NATO before 2014 when Russia first invaded. Now, the latest poll I saw, a good polling agency in Kyiv called the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, finds that 97% of Ukrainians want to be part of NATO because they're afraid, that Russia will keep attacking them. And what I've read in the papers, that may be wishful thinking on the part of these anonymous sources that talk to these reporters. And if it was a compromise where NATO gets immediate accession to NATO, that would still be politically fraught in Ukraine because the public and the polling shows us is still strongly opposed to a land for peace deal. And it's unlikely that Putin would accept such a compromise because Putin wants all the oblasts or states or regions he's claimed to have annexed, not only the parts his military already occupies. And he said NATO membership for Ukraine is unacceptable. So that's kind of what people are talking about in the background. We'll soon know what this victory plan is after Zelensky speaks with American and other nations' leaders. And so that's something to look for in the coming week. But what it looks like now is the U.S. is going to continue to give Ukraine enough weapons and economic aid not to lose the war, but not enough to win the war, which means Russia withdrawing back to Russia in a peace deal that guarantees Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, which is what a victory for Ukraine would look like, is not what the U.S. is really pushing. And even the limited aid that we're providing at this point, we being the U.S., they have still not delivered about $6 billion worth of weapons to Ukraine that were finally authorized last March after a 6-month delay. Remember, the Republicans held it up and they finally got it into the omnibus spending bill. They kept the government funded until this September 30th. Well, the funding runs out September 30th, and they still haven't sent this $6 billion worth of weapons to Ukraine. You wonder what they're waiting for. They know it's going to be hard to get more weapons authorized. And so, now we're facing a government shutdown. So what's happened is the EU has gone ahead without the U.S. and just announced a $35 billion aid program to Ukraine without U.S. participation. They're beginning to Trump-proof Europe. But in any case, everybody, our Ukrainians, Putin and the Russians, they're looking at the U.S. elections. They know that if Trump is elected, Ukraine will not be getting more aid from the U.S. They know if Harris is elected, they might get some more aid from the U.S. And needless to say that the left in Ukraine, I'm talking about the Green Party, the Democratic Socialist groups, the trade unions, and the anarchist, feminist, and LGBTQ collectives have been saying nothing good about Jill Stein or Cornel West or the other campus and pacifists who campaign against arms to Ukraine, even more explicitly than Trump does. And let's link now to, there's a 20-minute new video that was produced by the Feminist Workshop in Lviv, Ukraine, and the Iranian-American socialist feminist, Frida Afari, who is active in the Ukraine Solidarity Network in the U.S. And it's a good 20-minute appeal for international solidarity from feminists in Ukraine. And, the Ukrainian left is disgusted that so much of the Western left is making excuses and apologies for Russian imperialism instead of being in solidarity with the Ukrainian left and progressive forces in Ukraine and their anti-imperialist resistance to Russia's invasion and occupation. And they'll tell us, and I've talked to them, this stance by so many Western leftists makes their organizing in their country, Ukraine, and this is true for East European leftists generally, makes it harder for them because they perceive the Western left as supporting the authoritarian imperialism of Russia. And, the campus claim to support democracy and human rights under international law, but they're just as hypocritical as Biden, who won't condemn the war crimes of Netanyahu, and these campuses won't condemn the war crimes of Putin, for whom the International Criminal Court, in case anybody is questioning this, has issued an arrest warrant for abducting tens of thousands of Ukrainian children and subjecting them to forced Russification. And forcibly transferring children out of a national group is explicitly listed as a crime of genocide in the Genocide Convention that was adopted unanimously by the UN General Assembly in 1948 and has now been ratified by 153 countries. We really need a left here in the West that is consistently anti-imperialist, against all imperialist aggression by any country, and practices solidarity without exception with nations resisting foreign aggression, occupation, and exploitation. That would seem to be a basic principle of the left, but some people don't seem to have got it. And let's go back to the U.S. for a minute. Presidential election is a toss-up. It's close. It's within the margin of error. Harris maybe leads a little bit in the popular vote, but the Electoral College is looming. And Trump, to be clear, is threatening to unleash racist programs on a mass scale against Black and Latino and Asian immigrants. And he intends to replace constitutional democracy with right-wing authoritarianism, and enabled to do so by the Supreme Court's recent decision of presidential immunity for crimes committed by the president as official acts. And then Trump's campaign apparatus and MAGA Republicans across the country are organizing to disenfranchise and intimidate voters they don't think will vote for them, and election administrators who won't bend to their demands to rig the elections in their favor. And we know if he's reported to be losing, we can expect violence from armed fascist groups. I mean, it's going to be a wild election. Trump's racist hardcore base is a minority of the electorate, at best 30%. The other 10 to 15% in his voting base are affluent people who want tax cuts. And they'll go along with the racism to get the tax cuts. But in these circumstances, Harris should landslide Trump. A majority of Americans are racially and socially pretty tolerant, but a strong majority supports progressive populist economic policies. I'm talking about 60 to 70% or more. Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, a job guarantee, tuition-free public college, rent control in this housing market, raise the minimum wage, tax the rich. I mean, the public opinion polls are very clear. And if Harris would campaign on that kind of program, she would win a lot of support from people who might be staying home or thinking Trump is, their guy. But apparently she's not willing to do that, nor are her corporate sponsors. And she could win back Arab and Muslim votes that she's losing. And those could be the difference in Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and a number of the swing states where the Arab and Muslim vote could be the margin of difference. If she just announced a policy of conditioning arms to Israel on its conformity to human rights and international law, that would be enough. And Israeli atrocities every week give her a new opportunity to announce such a policy, but she's apparently not willing to do that either. So if the Democrats lose to one of the biggest all-time losers, Donald Trump, it's going to be their own damn fault. No doubt they're going to blame Jill Stein and the Green Party, but their fate, the Democrats' fate, is in their own hands, not Jill Stein's. The Green Party is not really the Democratic Party's problem. The problem is their own insistence on pushing unpopular policies on the people, the pro-corporate economic policies, and supporting Israel's pitiless slaughter in Gaza. And you also have a problem with the Electoral College and plurality winner voting instead of ranked choice voting for president. And the Democrats have had this problem clearly since Bush v. Gore in 2000, and they've done nothing about it. So I'm saying if they lose, it's their own fault. And get ready to, if Trump wins, to be attacked for just being Greens. Another thing happened this week, and this is my last point, is that the National Teamsters Union didn't endorse in the presidential election, which Trump took as a victory. And it gives the excuse from the National Teamsters anyway for working class people to vote for Trump. I put out a Twitter thread about this. Let's put the link to that in there. And the president, Sean O'Brien, is really helping Trump in this. He went and spoke at the virulently anti-labor Republican convention leading up to, their non-endorsement. They interviewed Cornel West and RFK Jr., as well as Trump and Harris, but not Jill Stein. And, Sean O'Brien knows me. Fred Zuckerman knows me. He's the Secretary General. I put on his T-shirt, if I can get it up there on the screen. I campaigned for this guy. We were going against Jimmy Hoffa Jr. Whoop, things backwards. There you go. There, I campaigned for this guy. He knows me. The rest of those Teamsters tops know me. And they know that the green ticket in 2020, which was me, a Teamster, and Angela Walker, a truck driver, who was a union leader in her transit workers union in Milwaukee, were running for president. They didn't interview us. We asked to be interviewed. They ignored us. And they should have interviewed the Green Party in this election, which has a pro-labor platform. And as I said, ran two workers who worked in the Teamsters core industries, trucking and warehousing in 2020. But it seems the Teamster tops are more interested in hobnobbing with political elites, like O'Brien going down to Mar-a-Lago to talk to Trump, than uplifting workers who run for office or a pro-worker policy platform. So, we got a problem, not just with the Teamsters, although most of the unions are back in Harris, but the problem is labor gets taken for granted because they make those endorsements without, getting anything in return, and they get taken for granted. So the Green Party or some left parties got to organize within the unions if we're going to change their politics, which, right now they endorse the Democrats or whoever the incumbent is out of hand without making demands, hoping to have a seat at the table, being able to get in the door to talk to these politicians, but having no power because the votes are not threatened. And I contended, there's some people in the old Labor Party that say, we won't be able to have a Labor Party until we get 10% of the unions to back it. And I've always answered them saying, we won't get the unions to back a progressive third party until it's getting consistently over 10% of the vote in major elections. And but we need to do more than run candidates. We need to organize rank and file at our jobs and in our unions to push for real political education in our unions. That's what Angela did. She was responsible in the Milwaukee Transportation Workers Union for education. And, a lot of these officers don't want the rank and file organized and educated because the rank and file might elect new leaders, new officers. But we can fill the vacuum that's left because the union isn't really engaging members. Most unions aren't really engaging their members in political education and activities. And we can be the rank and file caucuses that lead the way in filing grievances to enforce contracts, in political education of the members, and demanding rank and file participation in all union activities from contract negotiations to political endorsements. So I got a beef with the National Teamsters. Most of the regional councils and a lot of locals have backed Harris, as has the Black Caucus in the Teamsters. But the headline went to the O'Brien and the National Teamsters this week. And Trump praised it. It's sad. So I'm going to stop there and look forward to your questions and answers. But your answers, your comments. Midwest, the rest. I found your plan last week for how Green Party should be more centralized fascinating. How exactly is it organized now? Greens didn't make ballot access in Iowa for the first time ever. Partly because of a new oppressive law, but it is not nearly as bad as some states. Yeah, I didn't know we had failed in Iowa. I'd have to look at the map again. Iowa's not that hard, you're right. I wasn't talking so much about centralization as having a national organization and structure and staff that can support the base, the organizing locals, organizing states, and also, projecting the Greens to the media and to the public. We have elected, we've won 1,500 elections since in our existence. We have about 150 Greens in local office now. And we don't, that's something most people don't know. AOC didn't know it in her, gaslighting rant against Jill Stein and the Green Party last week. Where she's lying. We now know that, maybe I should put the link to that. I think I put the link to the article last week about, I wrote an article called AOC Boosts Jill Stein by Attacking Her. I mean, the Democrats are giving Jill Stein a platform to respond. They're her best publicist right now. I think that strategy of attacking her is going to backfire because it's just going to make more people aware of her position, particularly on Gaza, but other progressive economic policies. And despite the attacks, it's more important to be covered and be able to respond than to be ignored. But the Greens nationally could do a much better job of that. Okay, now, AOC boosts Jill Stein by attacking her. Yeah, if you click on that link, I found out after writing that article that AOC had put on her Twitter account back in 2017 a picture of her with the leaflets of the Green candidate, Jabari Brisport. So we know she got the Green New Deal from the Green Party. There you go. There's the picture. Hardlands Media, that's how I found out. But I've since found out I've got the link right to AOC's Twitter account. So she knows where she got it from. And her talk about the Greens not running local candidates is obviously a lie if you look at that picture. I was talking to one of the Greens in Brooklyn yesterday, and she said, yeah, we met AOC. She was phone banking for Jabari Brisport. So the idea that we don't run local candidates, AOC should be ashamed of herself for spreading that lie. Although if you read that article, I say, we got a problem on the broad progressive left is that we spend a lot of time or more time attacking people that are closest to us politically than we do people like Trump. And that's AOC attacking us. I think, we often spend a lot of our venom on the progressive Democrats and what I say at the end is we should, I say the Green Party the door is open for collaboration on these issues. Even if we disagree on electoral strategy, we can work on things like Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, taxing the rich between elections. And I also argue that a strong independent left strengthens the hand of progressive Democrats within their party because we're threatening votes. And then they got a real reason to tell the corporate Democrats, we got to give some or we're going to lose some. So anyway, back to the question. I don't like to say centralized because that implies centralized decision making. And we should have a bottom-up decision-making process. So this, stronger central, organization of the Green Party should be accountable to the base in terms of policy and priorities. So the other part of your question was, well, how does the Green Party work now? And we are a federation of state parties. We're not a organization of Green Party members where individual members pay dues and they have rights to a voice and a vote in the Green Party process. Each state party sets those rules up, and the state parties are very uneven. Some are pretty well organized. Others are just a few people that got the franchise and aren't doing much organizing. And the problem with that is every state gets at least 2 votes on the national committee. You get some more if by this complicated formula you are seen to have more activity. But that gives states not organizing disproportionate power in the national committee. So I think we have a lot of people there that don't have a clue about how to organize. So it's left to each state. So if you want to support organizing the locals, each state has to set that up and fund it and staff it. And I'm arguing that if we had one center doing that for every state that asks it, if we pooled our resources, it'd be a lot more efficient and a lot more effective. So that's a whole another discussion about structure of the Green Party. And I think I talked about it somewhere recently, but I'm going to leave it there. And I hope that helps you understand how we're structured and its limits. Scout Trooper 164, did you see Mehdi Hassan's interview with Stein in which he called her out for calling Netanyahu a war criminal, but couldn't simply call Putin one? The fact she still believes in Russian propaganda is crazy. I think with respect to Ukraine, she just believes their explanation for why they invaded. They were provoked by NATO. And we can go into that if you want, but in the end, Jill Stein did say, yes, Putin is a war criminal. So did Butch Ware. I don't know if they actually said it about Assad, but they issued a statement on Twitter yesterday, the campaign Twitter account or Jill's Twitter account, saying yes, Putin and Assad are war criminals, as are Netanyahu, Biden, Harris, Obama, Cheney, and others. Which I think it was a pretty good statement. I would have tweaked it here or there, but I think that's a good response to, because she came across looking hesitant to call Putin a war criminal, and the Democrats and the media have made a big deal out of that. So I think that was a good statement. But if you go to that tweet, and I don't have it handy, but and you look at the comments, the campus jumped on her right away. People like George Galloway in Britain, and Scott Ritter, and the Revolutionary Blackout Network. These are tankies. We call them tankies because they backed, since the 50s, when they backed the Russian tanks going into Hungary when their workers revolted into Czechoslovakia when they tried to have socialism with the human face of democratic socialism and so forth. And these are people that ally with Russia, even though Russia doesn't even pretend to be socialist now. These are people that call themselves on the left. They're hypocrites. So I saw the interview. I think she didn't handle it the best. She should have just said simply, yes, Putin is a war criminal. And at one point she tried to say, well, that hasn't been proven. And Hassan pointed out correctly that, wait a minute, the International Criminal Court has indicted Putin for abducting children to Russia, which, as I pointed out at the top, is a crime of genocide. And so there's an arrest warrant out for him from the International Criminal Court. So anyway, I think I wish she was a little more skeptical of what comes out of the Russians, because they are justifying an imperialist war. Okay, we got the link to the Twitter statement from Jill, and you can see the comments that the tankies, they don't play and they don't sleep. They got right on her, as I know from experience. Jack Lucas, Jill Stein's supporters have been so whiny over Angela Rye and Mehdi Hassan's sensible question, and the campaign has amplified them. It's not going to motivate more outlets to interview her. It may even turn them off. And it can't cover up her own inability to go in prepared. I think in terms of the impact, it's a little different. The fact that she's getting more attention is just, her biggest problem is people even knowing she's on the ballot. So they're helping out that way. And the first part of that question, could you put that up again? I forgot. There was something I wanted to respond to. Whiny over Angela Rye and Mehdi Hassan's sensible questions. Yeah. There was a lot of talking over in both cases. And I think, my reaction was, when Jill Stein said to Angela Rye, when she asked about, you can't win, you're not winning, why are you running, something like that. And Jill said those are the talking points of white supremacists, which implied Angela Rye was a white supremacist. And I thought, man, that's not what you say an older white lady says to a younger black woman. Just answer the question. So it was contentious, instead of directly answering the question, just answer the question and state your disagreement, but don't try to characterize what the other person is doing. And a lot of people, I've read the comments in both interviews, thought that, Angela Rye and Mehdi Hassan were too aggressive. And, maybe they talked over a little bit, but I thought they were fair questions. And, Jill should be prepared to deal with those in a succinct way instead of being, when you criticize the premises of the question, you're being defensive. Rather than saying forthrightly, well, here's where I stand and why. So, and then, you talk about being prepared. I was a little shocked when she didn't know when Angela Rye asked her how many members of the House are there, and Jill said 600. It's 435. That was embarrassing too. But they're not, they're not. Some people said that was her Aleppo moment. That what's his name, Johnson, the Libertarian Party. He was asked on MSNBC, "What are we going to do about Aleppo when Russia was bombing it to smithereens?" And Johnson said, "Aleppo." He didn't know what it was, and he's running for president. But Donald Trump doesn't know answers to any of these questions either. So I think the fact that Jill is being talked about on the whole is positive. And but I would, in my opinion, the campaign would be better off by emphasizing our positive policy positions rather than, I get their pretty much daily email appeals for funding. They seem to be emphasizing how bad Harris is rather than saying what's so positive about what we're offering. In my experience, voters, including people that support you, are more interested in what you're talking about than in hearing from you what's wrong with the other people. Anyway, that's my campaign advice. I don't know if it'll get to where it might make a difference, but that's my reaction. Z-Money, how's the writing campaign for New York State going? I imagine this sort of campaign is quite different to run. How is the approach different? Well, we got a palm card and a social media graphic being prepared and maybe ready by the time I'm speaking now. And that we will circulate that. What's different is if you're on the ballot, you have in New York, I could get on, mainstream media. I could get in New York Times, Daily News, the Albany Times Union, the Syracuse Post Standard, the Rochester and Buffalo papers were a little tougher, but I could get in there, get covered by Spectrum and NPR. So you can do a media campaign. It's really hard when you're a writing candidate. As I found out, didn't surprise me in 2022 when we failed to get on the ballot and ran a writing campaign for governor and lieutenant governor. And the state didn't even count the write-in votes. They counted the total number, which is around, as I recall, 10,000. And the Libertarians kind of went around because some of the counties did count. And we figured we split it with the Libertarians. So maybe we got 5,000 write-ins. Not enough to make the Democrats or Republicans worry. You need to be on the ballot. In New York, it's 45,000 signatures in 42 days. It's the worst ballot access in the United States. And it's hard to find one as bad anywhere in the world. So, we will do our little write-in campaign, but I think the main thing we got to do in New York is get the ballot access law changed. And they didn't change how many signatures it takes to run for local, state, or the House. It's not easy. 3,500 for the House is kind of middling among the states. That means about 7,000 good ones because we know the Democrats will challenge us. So it's 5% of the voters in the district rather than 5% of the enrolled Greens. So it's a tough petition, but we can do that. And we can run Greens all over the state. When you do an independent petition, you got to give it a party label. So we'll give it a green label. We could run a lot of Greens, and I think that would help build the Green Party in New York State as we work to get the statewide election law changed. When we do get ballot access, it's a lot easier to get 5% of the Greens in your district than you get 5% of all the voters in the district. So it's worth trying to get that ballot law back to a reasonable standard. And I say it's back to the Putin standard. In Russia, if you want to run for their state Duma, which is their Congress, from an oblast or what they call an autonomous republic, it's 15,000 signatures in 45 days. The old New York standard was 15,000 signatures in 42 days, about the Putin standard. And I've joked with state legislators and their staff that, hey, just get us back to the Putin standard. We can live with that. And they chuckle and say, yeah, you're right. But they always find an excuse why they can't do it now. the governor will get on their back, or they need to take it through the elections committee, and we need to talk to some other legislators that got more pull than they do. It's the runaround. So if we start running candidates against them, for state house, state assembly, we call it, and state senate, maybe it'll perk them up and they'll go to work on that. Scout Trooper 164. The Trump family may be leaving the U.S. if Trump loses the election. Any thoughts? Okay, he's going to flee prosecution, and I think he said he might go to Venezuela, which doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States. That would be ironic. I don't know. Yeah, and they'd be taking their money out and putting it in tax havens, which they probably already mostly done. I would just say good riddance. Trump is a poison in the body politic. Andrew Hager, where would they even have to go anyway? Well, I said Venezuela. I think Trump has even suggested that. Donald Trump. Saudi Arabia, his son-in-law, what's his name? He did a lot in the first administration. He's keeping his distance now. I'm blanking on his name. But he's a slumlord of real estate. Comes from a slumlord family. Jared Kushner. Yeah, he's doing a lot of business with the sheiks, the sheiks in the Gulf. And, one of those states might give him safe harbor. So that would be, if it's not Venezuela, it might be one of those Gulf kingdoms. Zimani, I see U.S. Congress reintroduced the Ranked Choice Voting Act in both houses. There seems to be potential for this bill in this political climate as a good time to elicit public pressure for it. Yeah, but the problem with that bill is that it's for single-member ranked choice voting rather than the Fair Representation Act, which is for multi-winner ranked choice voting for the House, which would create proportional representation. That's a much better bill. And I think I pointed this out before, but Australia has single-member ranked choice voting for their House and multi-winner ranked choice voting for their Senate. And for years, the Greens have got their proportional share. They're about 10 to 12% of the vote, and then they get that proportion in the Senate. But in the House, they had one for a long time. Now they're up to 4 because they've got very good organizations in a few of those House districts. But still, it's disproportional. They get 10 to 12% of the vote in the House races there, but they have, I forget what the numbers are, but it's like 1 or 2% of the votes in that House. So we want proportional ranked choice voting. And what irritates me is a lot of the people like Jamie Raskin and the guy who's the original sponsor of the Fair Elections Act, Beyer in Virginia, they're co-sponsoring both bills. And I'm afraid they're going to substitute the Ranked Choice Voting Act for the Fair Elections Act, which is for proportional representation. So I think we should keep pushing the Fair Elections Act until, people pushing the Ranked Choice Voting Act, no, go for the Fair Representation Act. It's a better Ranked Choice Voting Act. So now, is there huge potential for this bill? I don't know. We are winning on the question of ranked choice voting. It's on the ballot in at least 6 states, one way or another. In Alaska, they're trying to repeal it. In Missouri, they're trying to preempt it, ban it before it's even been implemented. In 4 other states, it's on the ballot. The problem there is it's linked to top 4 or top 5 jungle primaries before you get to the ranked choice general election. And those jungle primaries, anybody in any party, including multiple people from any party, can get in those primaries, which take the Green Party in California where they have top 2. The Green Party will endorse a Green candidate for these offices. But other people will jump in, even if they're not Greens, and say they are Green and run. And so when the rank and file Greens show up to vote for the Green, they don't know which Green to vote for. The ones that the party activists have backed. So it takes away, these jungle primaries take away from parties their right to nominate their own candidates. What that does is shift the balance of power to the well-funded, the rich candidates, who either out of their own pocket or with rich backers have the money to get their name out there and win, one of the top seats in the jungle primary. Then it's ranked choice between those. But like in California, if you're in a Democratic district, you usually have two Democrats going on to the general election. And if it's a Republican district, two Republicans. So let's push the Fair Representation Act in Congress and tell the Ranked Choice Voting Act, we can do better than that. And that's the Fair Representation Act. Zimani, Howie, good point, Ray, this distinction. From what you're saying, it looks like they're using the diluted RCV bill to deflect the demand, like the Democrats use the Affordable Act to deflect Medicare for all. That might be the motivation of some. I think it's more likely that they're saying, well, the House isn't ready for proportional representation, so we'll get it first for single member districts. The problem with that is once you make a big change like that, and then you come back and say, well, what we really want is multi-winner proportional representation, ranked choice voting. A lot of the people that were with you for the single member district ranked choice voting are going to say, why didn't you tell us that before? Why did you back this bill instead of the other? I think it makes it harder to get to proportional representation. Why not? If you're going to put all your effort into getting a good bill passed, get the best bill passed. I think it may be a little different than the Dems using the Affordable Care Act to deflect from Medicare for all. I think it may be just low expectations on the part of these liberals and progressives in the House. At war with dust. Do you believe the U.S. is headed for another recession? And if so, which party will be blamed and which party will benefit? You know what the economists say, including the Marxists. They predict. They predicted 10 out of the last 2 recessions. I don't know if we're headed for a recession. If we do, at this point, when the recession comes next year, well, of course, if the Democrats are elected, they'll get the blame. If Trump is elected, he'll blame the Democrats, and the Democrats will blame him. But the real blame will be about the dynamic in the economy. Why is investment down and economic growth down? What caused that? So it's in the economy, and in our system, there's such a separation between political management and economic management that while the politicians get blamed, they really don't have much say in it. They could if we went to a more democratic economic system, socialism or eco-socialism. But right now, the economy has its own dynamic. And even the interest rates, which are not the biggest factor but have some effect, the Federal Reserve is independent. They make their own decisions without consulting the executive branch or Congress. Although politics does influence them, it's got to, but that's more public opinion and particularly the opinion of the investor class. So I don't know if we're headed for a recession, but I know the two parties will blame each other if we get there, and the real blame will be in structural problems with the economy that didn't issue from policies. Although I think Trump's, wanting to jack up tariffs on everything could stimulate a recession. It's going to mess up global trade and create all kinds of problems. So, I guess the politicians can precipitate a recession by being stupid, and Trump is perfectly capable of that. Amy L. Sachs, hey y'all. Who has a good green running down ballot where they live? I need to give a shout out to Joe Meyer and Justin Phillip in Oregon. Well, there are a lot of greens running. I think it's well over 100. I think I saw the number recently. It's like 125. There's got to be some good ones with that many. I've seen at least one that I wish wasn't running. Somebody who's got a mental health problem, but she's on the ballot. But so I don't know who to tout. I mean, we've talked to some of them from New Jersey on this show, and I'm happy to talk to others going forward. The Green Garrett, Pennsylvania wasn't challenged this year, thankfully. So we have statewide candidates on the ballot in Pennsylvania: Jill Stein for president and Layla Hazou for U.S. Senate. And I had Layla on this podcast. So actually, I had her on the podcast when I was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, petitioning. So, the statewide candidates in Pennsylvania would be on the ballot. And yes, thankfully, they weren't even challenged this year. I mean, the Democrats must be getting lazy. I thought they would challenge in Pennsylvania. But the petition must have been so solid, they just felt it wasn't worth the effort. Zimani, Butch just said he'll run for governor of California in 2026, generally to raise the profile of ongoing races between the presidential ticket. You've also been calling for more people running down ballot. I think what you mean, if I'm right, is raising the Green Party profile between presidential elections. And yeah, governor for California is a big office. And, there are good reasons to run for that. In my state, you get a ballot line. I was able to do that as a gubernatorial candidate 3 times for the Green Party here. But if I had my druthers in those elections, I would have been running for state assembly or state senate or Congress, where I could have built a campaign that had a chance to win. In the governor's race, we had a chance to change the debate, which we did in those races, and put pressure on those who are elected to do things like ban fracking, raise the minimum wage, institute paid family leave, increase funding for the public schools. We got all those things, partly because I got 5% against Cuomo in 2014. And he felt he had to do something to try to get those votes back. Somebody's knocking on the door, on the window, but if they're there in 10 minutes, I'll talk to them. Vicky Corden, what do you think that in Georgia they will count the votes by hand? It is another way to delay election certification. Yes, it is. It's been a right-wing demand, although, the so-called People's Party that Nick Brana was, pushing, was calling for that, as he called for a bunch of other right-wing things. Cornel West picked it up when he first ran with them, and so some of us explained to him, what that's really about. Hand counting is actually less accurate than machine counting the paper ballots. We should have paper ballots, but machine counting generally accurate. And if you do need to do a recount, you can do an accurate hand count, but that's a much slower process with representatives of all the candidates present, looking at each ballot, everybody agreeing what's on that ballot. And if there's disagreement, it being set in another pile where it goes before a judge. But to expect all these local precincts and then counties to hand count is going to delay it. It's going to make inaccuracies. It can also, if a local election board or precinct is biased toward one party or the other, create fraud in counting the vote. It's a terrible idea, and it's one of the things Republicans are trying to do to tilt the field toward Trump. The other thing they're doing right now is trying to get Nebraska to change the law, so instead of awarding their electoral votes proportionally, I think they have 4 votes, and usually the Republicans get 3 and the Democrats get 1. They would just want to make it winner take all, so they'll get another electoral vote. So all that stuff is going on. And I think it's a terrible idea in Georgia. Andrew Hager. Howie, I've heard the UK is planning to convert one of their diesel locomotives to run on nitrogen, ushering in a new era of steam. Any opinions on this experiment? Andrew, send me a link about that, and I'll read it. I just don't know much about it or anything about it, really. One of the things, this is just an energy topic, since you brought up, energy and transportation. We got to push for new nuclear power plants from the Bitcoin industry, which is between that and AI, artificial intelligence, our energy demand, our electricity demand in this country and around the world is going to skyrocket. And, we need to put limits on what Bitcoin can do and what AI can do in increasing electricity production. And what they're doing is trying to revive mothballed nuclear power plants, like at 3 Mile Island. Meta, is it Meta? Facebook? No, Microsoft. I think it's Microsoft is pushing and I guess investing in, billions in bringing this mothballed nuke back to life at 3 Mile Island, where they had the other nuke there, had that terrible accident. And this is just a terrible idea. So, and people like, we got Kathy Hochul here in New York, who's doing a terrible job on implementing our climate legislation, and now she's pushing nukes. AOC has said she's open to nukes. I mean, we gotta rebuild the anti-nuclear movement, because a lot of people are falling for this. It's a lot for the money you can spend on nuclear power. You can build a lot more electric power production by investing in wind and solar, and it'll come online a lot quicker than a new nuke. So we got to get active on the anti-nuclear front again. Scout Trooper 164, Howie, do you plan on getting Ryan Macbeth for an interview when it comes to Palestine and Ukraine issues? I'd like to see that on this podcast. I'm not familiar with Ryan Macbeth, but I will check him out. I'm just writing down his name. Yeah, I just don't know who he is. I guess he's somebody that he's a YouTuber, or he writes articles. I just don't know. Zimani, fuel is a great question. One of my favorite 2020 moments was on MSNBC when that Colin guy thought he could outwonk Howie with a question about solar car batteries, and Howie knocked him flat on his detailed reply. Sure it was MSNBC? What I remember of MSNBC, they didn't have call-in. I was on for 3 minutes on Morning Joe, and then they spent 3 minutes kind of admitting that what I had to say was popular. Like a lot of people would like it, like they like Bernie Sanders' policies, but you can't afford to vote for him. We got to stop Trump. So they spent 3 minutes telling people not to vote for me. So it was kind of an anti-commercial, probably one of the C-SPAN appearances. Yeah, I really enjoyed my C-SPAN interviews. Those were the ones where I was able to, fully elaborate answers, and they were good questions. and both from the host and from the people that called in. It must have been the C-SPAN. Yeah, MSNBC. I have to say though, even though they set me up so they could counsel against voting for me, we got more traffic and donations from those 3 minutes that I was on MSNBC from any other media I had in 2020. And that's why I say it's better to be on and be able to say your piece, even if the other side's pushing back, than to not be covered at all. Okay, so that's another hour, and thank you for being here. Next week, we're going to have Chris Parker, who's a independent investigative journalist who's just back from Ukraine. So he's going to tell us, what he experienced there. He's talking to regular people and seeing what's going on in different parts of Ukraine. And so it'll be a good opportunity to talk to somebody who is just back and reporting on what's going on, particularly with the people in Ukraine. Chris is he's part of our Ukraine Solidarity Network in the U.S., but he's also a journalist who's had a number of articles published. And he went over there to get more information and write some more. So also taking pictures over there. So that's who we'll have on next week, and we'll focus on Ukraine. And, thanks for being here this week. And everybody have a good week. And let's hope the big regional war doesn't break out now in the Middle East. It doesn't look good. Anyway, we'll see you here next week. Same time, 3 o'clock Eastern time.